We begin with Stephen King. He is a national treasure of terror. Since the publication of his first book, Carrie, in 1974, Stephen King has written 27 novels that have sold 150 million copies worldwide and made him very rich. His work, including The Shining and Misery, has been adapted into 24 feature films and 6 television productions. His latest book, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, is a retrospective of King's phenomenal career, including many hard-to-find stories and several that are being published for the first time. We're very pleased to have him with us this time. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. It's nice to be here.
It is really good to have you here. We've wanted to do this for a while. Tell me, what kind of books do you write?
Well, if you ask the ordinary run-of-the-mill reader, if there is such a guy or such a gal, I guess that I write horror novels. I think that what I actually write are suspense novels.
What's the difference?
I think that the purpose of the horror novel is to sort of gross you out. My idea of it is, and I'm not averse to this, I will do this, it's part of the fun of it, is it's kind of it's a childish thing, the way that humor is. The two things are closely allied. They both elicit, when they work to their best, a vocal reaction from the audience. Laughter, if it's comedy, and a scream or a yell if it's horror. But they're both childish, and it's kind of like when you're a kid and you're sitting at the dining room table and you want to get to your sister or your brother, you kind of chew up your food and then you hang your mouth open like that.
Yes.
That's horror. Suspense is a little more high class than that, so maybe that's why
My mother
I
used
prefer
to
the
say
word.
that was tasteless.
That's tasteless, yeah, that's right. Well, my mother, when I was a kid, used to say, "Stephen, your taste is all in your mouth." And that's true, but it has made me relatively wealthy.
Yes, it has. Not even relatively. Very.
But I have a lot of relatives,
Yeah.
so.
Do you know where it all comes from? I mean, it comes out of your imagination, but why this for you? Why not other kinds of novels?
No, I don't know where it all comes from, and that's the literal, unvarnished truth. I don't know where it comes from any more than I know where the color of my eyes comes from.
Well, I can tell you where
know.
that comes from.
Well, all right, that's genetically
Right.
inherited from your mother and your father. And my mother used to enjoy writing, and my father wrote a lot of stories and mailed them to the pulp magazines of the 40s and 50s, like Argosy and that sort of thing. And I guess some of them were pretty good, but I've never seen any of them. So I have a little of that from my parents, and my children have a little of it from me.
You wanted to write from an early age.
Yeah. It was what there was for me. I always did it. I always took great pleasure in it. I still take great pleasure in it. The actual act of composition. For me, the part that I don't like starts when you turn a manuscript in to the publisher. That's like you have your own private field that's full of snow in the backyard, and nobody's tracked in it but you, and you give it to them, and then they open it to the public.
You mean that whole creation is only yours, and only you know those characters, your editor, but forget that. You are the only person that's lived with them, know where they're going, what they think, how they conflict, what's going to happen to them.
And I'm the only one that has an opinion on them. And then an editor comes along and says, well, we'll change this and that. This new one, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, a lot of the stories go back half my lifetime, actually. And so some of them were written by a very young man. And then the editor comes up and says, well, maybe if you change this or tweak that. And it's not that they're wrong. That's not what I'm saying. It's that you say, well, that was mine for a long time. Now you come in here and it's maybe too. I'm from Maine. I'm a Yankee. Maybe that's a Yankee reaction. You know, leave my backyard alone.
Do you create characters you like?
Usually I do, but I don't always create characters that I like. Sometimes I create the sort of characters that I'm afraid of. When I was a kid,
You're afraid of?
Yeah. When I was a kid, there was a guy who, maybe the first of the modern serial killers. He was a guy named Charlie Starkweather.
Right.
And
he was the guy off the Texas
right,
tower.
Little bandy. No, that's much later than this. Starkweather was in Nebraska, and it was in the 50s. And I had a scrapbook. I cut out all these clippings of him, and my mother found this scrapbook. It was 57, so I would have been about 10 years old. And I think she decided right then and there that not all my wheels were on the road anymore. And she
Your
said,
elevator was not going to the top floor.
She said, why are you interested in this guy? And because I was only 10, and what articulation I had then went into the stories, and it really still does. I'm a much better writer than I am a talker. What I was not able to tell her was, there was one picture of this young man who killed these people, and what there was in his eyes was nothing at all. I mean, vacant rooms, depopulated planets, there was nothing. And what I was not able to tell her was, I need to look out for this guy. I need to know everything about him so that if I ever meet him or anybody like him, I can go around. And in my fiction, when I've created characters like John Rainbird in Firestarter or George Stark in The Dark Half, some of the real bad guys, I'm telling myself, reminding myself, look out for these guys. These guys are dangerous, and they're really out there.
But when you were, how old did you do this? This is when you were 9?
I was about 10.
Yeah. Now, did you try to write anything then when you were 9 and 10?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and a lot of it was the sort of stuff that I write now. There were horror stories, fantasy stories. See, I grew up on a diet of, let's say, the sort of comic books that kids weren't really supposed to read, like Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror and that sort of thing. One of the earliest stories that I remember my mother reading my brother and I was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So you see, I was warped from an early age, but the idea that this sort of thing, you know, somebody will sort of want to discuss your books if you write what I write, and they'll sort of sidle up to you and say, by the way, what was your childhood like?
Of course they do.
But mine was perfectly normal as a you know, a general case.
Back to the question I asked about what kind of books do you write? Do you compare yourself with no false modesty to anyone? When you look back, who would you like to be compared to? Where do you put your work?
Generally, once it's done and bound and in a book, I put it on the shelf and forget it and,
or send
and
it
go
to Hollywood
on to the
and
next
say,
thing.
send the check.
Yeah. There are writers that I like.
Yeah.
There are writers that I admire tremendously, and there are writers whose styles have helped me at various times that I've sort of taken into my own mix and tried to make a part of myself. I think that writers, when they're forming, are like what my mother always used to say, milk in the refrigerator takes the flavor of whatever's next to it, you know, so that as a kid, if I read a lot of H.P. Lovecraft, I'd write like Lovecraft. There are a couple of pastiches in the Nightmares and Dreamscapes, the new book. There's a Sherlock Holmes story that was written as part of a competition at a mystery weekend in Mohonk in upstate New York. And there's also a Chandler-esque Philip Marlowe hard-boiled detective story, because I admire that style tremendously. You know what I like? I don't necessarily want to be compared to anybody.
No, but just tell me who, you know, because there are people, the reason I asked the question, there are many who say, and this is complimentary to you, look back years from now, we'll look back at what Stephen King was writing, and we'll see you in a very different way as the audience who loves you so much and buys 150 million copies sees you. They may very well be responding to these sort of base emotions of a great story, first of all. I don't think that you would sell unless you tell a great story. I assume that you believe that as well. And
hey, if they remember me at all,
yeah.
I mean, it's amazing when you think about it, the writers who come and enjoy tremendous popularity and sort of disappear so that you find their works on back shelves in hotel suites or in, you know, bargain barns in New England. If I could write one book, let's say, in my genre that would be remembered the way that Dracula has been remembered. I love the idea of the novel Dracula because it's shameless pulp fiction, and it's melodramatic, and it has a lot of things in it that critics consider to be vices, and yet it's enjoyed its own life.
It stood the test of time.
That's right.
Yeah. And do you believe yours will stand the test of time?
Boy, I'd like to think so, and I think some of it has a chance because horror fiction, as a general rule, lives its own guerrilla life, so that sometimes it's the kind of thing where one kid will tell another, have you read this? Yeah. You know, and they'll go and get it out of the library. And I think that some of that stuff does have a tendency to last.
What, both on the superficial level, at the top level, not superficial, but at the very top, What is it that makes it so attractive, so it sells so many copies? Yours and others. What is it about the whatever? You don't call it horror, your work, horror. You don't call yourself a horror novelist for whatever reason. You
But
just
that's
said
okay.
suspense. But it's okay. I'm not
Yeah,
suggesting you're putting it down.
Right.
You're not. But what is it that grabs an audience at the first level?
Forbidden. Something
Forbidden.
that's forbidden. So that you're saying to somebody, come with me and I will say things to you that nobody else will say. And I will show you things that nobody else
That are
dares
so
to
horrible to imagine.
show to you. That's right. And again, it shares the same attraction as comedy, which says the same thing. Comedy humor says, comedy humor. Get me out of here. I just washed my mouth and I can't do a thing with it. But a movie that's really funny, that really makes people laugh, is generally saying, I'm going to show you something that you haven't seen before. So that when Mel Brooks did Blazing Saddles back in '74 or whatever it was, and the cowboys eat beans and then sit around the fire and they start to fart.
Right.
Well, nobody had ever heard anybody actually fart in a movie, and we all fell on the floor laughing. You know, it made that movie. So it was something that had been previously forbidden. You know, we all know about it. We all know that people pass gas, but nobody had ever put it on the big screen before.
And here, what are you doing? It's forbidden.
Well, for instance, in Pet Sematary, what I said was, here's something that we don't talk about. People sometimes have kids who die. There are terrible things that happen, and sometimes a child will die young. And in Pet Sematary, that happened, and I followed the family through the grieving process, and then the father goes out to the graveyard and digs his son up and tries to bring him back to life. And that can't happen. That is a total make-believe thing, just in case any of your viewers out there thought that they could dig people up and bring them back to life. It doesn't work that way. But in fiction, sometimes it can. And the important part about it, you know, I like to say that fiction is a lie, but good fiction is the truth inside the lie. And the truth that any person who's ever lost a child knows is that you wish you could bring them back to life. And the story explores what might happen if something like that could happen. So horror fiction, a lot of it, to me, is the lure of the forbidden.
Of the forbidden. Now, at a deeper or additional level, is it also some sense of dealing with your own fears?
I think it is. I think that...
By comparison, by what?
Well, by comparison, saying as bad as things are, they're not this bad. There are two stories...
As scared as you might be, this is the deepest and darkest.
This is the deepest, but on a level where I like to work now, because I've been here for a long time, I've done a lot of this stuff. I'm terrified of self-parody. I'm terrified of running out of ideas and just recycling the old stuff. The thing that interests me the most right now is the fact that sometimes things happen that are terrible, and there doesn't seem to be any clear reason why. There are two stories in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. There's one called Rainy Season, and there's another one called The Moving Finger. Rainy Season is about these tourists who are just sort of besieged by killer toads. And The Moving Finger is a story about an accountant from Queens who one night sees a finger poke out of the bathroom drain, just a finger, and it keeps getting longer. And in neither case are these phenomena explained. One of the things that, particularly in Hollywood, that filmmakers like you to do is to explain where these monsters came from, or whatever the phenomena was. What started this, which is ridiculous when you think about it.
Go ahead. It is ridiculous to do that. Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to do that? Because that ruins the mystery of the whole thing, does it not?
That's right. And the reason that you're doing what you're doing instead of producing movies is because you're relatively rational and can understand that.
Well, let's get to that subject. I mean, what about the movies that have been made out of your novels? I mean, some of them, they forget whatever is inside the book, and they take the title and they go off and make their movie. Now, that's simply trying to make a few bucks. But what about those that are more true to what you have written?
Well,
why do they fail? I don't mean fail in terms of your liking them, not in terms of an audience, not in terms of making money, but in terms of Stephen King saying, by God, they did a hell of a job.
Well, one movie that departs considerably from the book that's a failure is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. And I think that one failed because Kubrick was going to make the horror movie that was going to be the benchmark horror movie, the one by which other horror movies are judged, and he didn't really know the field. and he didn't take any time to educate himself in the field. So that I think that might be a failure of hubris. And with the case of another movie like Firestarter, which was the book, literally, exactly, point to point, it is the book, I think it's a failure because it doesn't have the sparkle and the life of the novel. I've been waiting for this to happen to John Grisham, but there's only been one film out. Grisham, I love his stuff, and one of the reasons
Why do you love his stuff?
I love his stuff because we all have a little censor inside our heads that stands at the gate between what we really think and what we actually say or write down. And Grisham's is out on a permanent coffee break. Whatever comes into that guy's mind, boom, it's on the page. Yeah. And that's what makes him really work. He's really alive, and the books are really alive. They may be a little bit unbelievable in places, and they may be a little bit rough-edged in terms of style. But The Firm worked really well.
As a movie?
As a movie. But the first movie ever made from one of my books, Carrie, also really worked well. And another thing that they have in common is in both cases, the film departed significantly from the book, but still worked. It'll be interesting to see how future films of his work, whether or not they can catch. What I'm trying to say, to lead back to your question, is the movie has to capture some of the spirit of the writer's heart and mind. And if it doesn't, generally speaking, what the reader went to the book and found and loved, the movie audience won't.
How many screenplays have you written?
I've written, you had to ask me that right off the top of my head.
Name the ones that you wrote.
I think, here, wait a second. Just bear with me, folks. I'm looking at what they call the masthead page, where I actually has it. Yeah. I've written Creepshow, Cat's Eye, Silver Bullet, Maximum Overdrive, Pet Sematary, Golden Years, Sleepwalkers, and The Stand.
And of which of those did you like the most?
The one that I like the best is The Stand, which is going to be a miniseries.
Okay, that's an 8-hour miniseries on ABC.
And that's why I like it, because it got a chance to spread.
And did you have more of a direct involvement with the director and the producer, so that more of the passion of the writer?
Charlie, I was the producer.
So that's the best way. I've always said that.
Well, either that or it's like I've sold out completely now. I've met the enemy and he is us. Yeah.
Yes. So you had control.
I had a fair degree of control. And listen, The Stand was a huge project, but it's the one where readers come to me and say, The Stand has to be a movie. Don't make The Stand into a movie. All in the same breath. There's this feeling like they want to see it, but they feel like it can't be done. And for 10 years we tried to do it as a theatrical, and it couldn't be done because it was too long. But the standards of TV have changed so much.
You can do more.
It's not the same medium.
There's more of a license now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right. Take a look. Here's a clip from The Stand, produced by, written by.
And in this case, with me in it, I think.
And with him in it, Stephen King. Roll tape. But the problem is you didn't learn one basic thing. If you have a crow in there, if you have a dog in there, if you have a cat in there, it'll steal the scene.
Every time. Well, we've got a dog in The Stand that was actually very difficult to work with. The dog's name was Kojak, and I said, well, let's replace him with a crow. We'll call him Crowjack. Ba-da-bum-bum.
Yeah.
Oh, actually.
You're happy with this? Did you like the acting yourself?
You mean acting myself?
As the actor.
Acting is something that I've done ever since college. I'm not very talented. There are a lot of critics who say I'm not a very talented writer, but compared to my acting skills, I'm John Steinbeck. You know?
Well, let's speak about critics. That's the other side. You do such great segues into what I want to talk about. How do you feel about the critics and what they say about you? And what do you think of the literary establishment in America?
I think that those are big fields. I can't cover all that.
Well, take critics first.
I think the critics, by and large, have been very fair to me over the years. As I've gotten more successful in terms of copies sold, the critical reaction to my stuff has been stiffer, and that's the way that it should be. When a lot of people are reading a lot of stuff, it deserves to be evaluated with a real strong edge of, what would you say, devil's advocacy, if you like. So that there's been some of that, but I also think that there's a critical view in this country that says we critics are the few, the proud, the brave, and we understand what real literary quality is, and there aren't very many of us guys.
Yeah.
Us real pencil neck geeks who understand the true meaning of a
just
peach.
get them all in, aren't you?
No, well, I'm sort of sliding that in there. But the idea is that there tends to be critical approval for people who have a fairly narrow range of appeal. And there is a feeling among the real critical intelligentsia that anybody who's being read by a lot of people can't be very good because the middle range is fairly low, and that's total bull.
And how much of it, though, is the fact that they don't think that the horror genre or even suspense genre is real literature?
I think there's some of that, but on the whole, because it has a real openness to allegory and symbolism, I've been better treated, and a lot of horror novelists have been better treated. Peter Straub, for instance, Patrick McGrath.
Right.
We've been better treated, and Clive Barker, than, say, really good Western novelists like
Louis.
Well, I don't know about Louis L'Amour.
He was treated pretty well.
Probably better than he deserved, in my
Okay, but
opinion.
how about Larry McMurtry?
Larry McMurtry is a good case in point. There are a lot of people who are working in the Western field. You know, one thing I'm curious about, that a field that's been totally overlooked by the critics, except when they want to sneer, is I wonder if anybody's done anything good in the romance field.
Well, answer your own question.
I don't know, because
I don't know the field. Yeah, I don't know who it is.
It's sort of like Sweet
I'm
Savage
sure,
Love and
clearly,
all that.
Yeah, somebody has.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't even know that I can name 5 romance novelists.
It's tough. Rosemary Rogers, and then I'm sort of Danielle Steele.
Danielle Steele, I would assume, would be in there.
Yeah.
What about the notion of a part of you wanting, I mean, a little part of you having all the success you've had, both in terms of readers, both in terms of enthusiasm for your latest book. Your name alone will sell the book now. I mean, if it's a Stephen King novel, they want it. And there's a built-in audience, as there is in a different genre for Tom Clancy and others. Does still a part of you hunger for sort of someone to say, this guy is a great writer?
Yes. Yes. There's always a feeling here that I would love to be allowed to go around to the front door instead of always having to use the tradesman's entrance. That would be wonderful. But essentially, I'm sort of resigned to the idea that I'm going to be regarded as a popular novelist with a popular novelist's virtues and a popular novelist's faults. And in a sense, that's all right. I'm running my own race now.
What do you mean?
I mean, my family is well provided for. There's no need. If it were a matter of money, I would never have to set my pen to paper or turn on my word processor again. If it were a matter of critical acceptance, I would stop right now, because that's never going to come on the level that you just mentioned. I don't think that
never.
No, I don't think so. Not in my lifetime, certainly, and probably not after.
But are you going to reach for it?
Oh yeah, always. Every time that I sit down, that's why I say I'm running my own race. Yeah. I'm writing to please myself, and I'm my own toughest critic. I've never been able to reach to the place that I want to be at. So.
But the last 2 novels, this is a compilation of a lot of things. The last 2 novels were the best reviewed, and some say a new direction for you, more in the genre of suspense than horror. Yes?
Well, I think that that's true. I think that...
As if you were reaching, stretching, growing, moving somewhere else.
Yeah. I think that people look at Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne. Dolores comes out in paperback next month, and I'll be interested to see how that does. Those are straight novels in the sense that there's no supernatural element, exactly. There's no hocus pocus, there's no, you'll notice that my arm goes all the way up to my shoulder and all that. They're straight novels.
How about Gerald's Game? Same thing.
Same thing.
Right.
But the basic thing is, I never said that I was a horror novelist. I never said that I was a suspense novelist. I never said I was anything except a guy who writes books.
And who
any labels that go on me, I don't accept those or reject those.
Why do you write so prolifically? Why so many? I mean, are those stories in there that have to get out, or is it...
Yeah, I think that they do, but I also think that some of it has to do with simply being fairly facile with words. That is to say, there's this story, I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, about James Joyce. Friend comes in, and Joyce has got his hands up on his head like this, and he's, oh, God. And the guy says, James, what's the matter? Did you have a bad day? How many words did you write? And Joyce goes, I wrote 7 words today. I says, that's not bad for you, James. He says, but I don't know what order they go in. And I've never been, I've never been that kind of a writer. I've always known what order they go in, and I think that sometimes that very facility has caused me problems with the critics, so that I am to popular novelists sort of what Algernon Swinburne was to poets.
At the end is you're just turning them out. You're just spinning them out.
And that's, in fact,
and
that's not the case.
And what?
In fact, that's not the case.
Is it hard?
Yeah, it's hard. And it gets harder. It doesn't get any easier at all.
There's no formula. There is no magic elixir that works for you.
No, you get an idea, you play with the idea, you get to the point where you say, well, I'm certainly not going to try to write that. That would be much too difficult, and I don't have the time anyway. And then you find yourself doing it anyway. And
but once you get the idea set, and once you get the, do you know where the ending is before you start writing?
I usually think I do.
Yeah. But does it surprise you?
Quite often, it will not end the way that I expected it to do at all. Yeah. So it does usually surprise.
Because
but that's good. If that happens, it means that you've got an organic, living piece of work that you're dealing with there. It's alive, it's changing, it's evolving as it goes along. If it's just sort of on the page, I remember reading one time that Earl Stanley Gardner had all these notebooks, and he would pick and mix and match, you know, like Etch-a-Sketch and...
Yeah, right. Like painting by the numbers, so to speak?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And who would want to write that way?
When you, between what you finish and the editor, does the editor have much influence on your stuff, or is it pretty much now they look and say 150 million copies, Steve, looks pretty good to me? Stephen?
Oh boy, if I had an editor who felt that way, I would get a new editor
because they really do help you.
Yeah, and the thing is, there was a time in the 70s where, you know, I'd read criticisms that would say, oh, Stephen King could publish his laundry list if he wanted to. And the horrible thing is probably now I could publish my laundry list. I don't know how many copies it would sell, but I could probably get somebody
a lot, except the next time you published a book.
Yeah, it would really hurt.
Yes.
So I want an editor that's fairly tough on me. I'm in the process of rewriting a book now, and I've got a manuscript that's covered with line edits. The editor's name is Chuck Verrill. He's very, very good, and at this stage in the manuscript, I could kill him.
But what does he do for you? Is it plot development?
He won't let me be Stephen King. That's the most important thing. He won't let me be.
He treats you as a first novelist?
Inflatable, yeah, right. As somebody who has to answer for the things that they've done. He will not let me be a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade float. You know, big, inflated cartoon figure. I'm supposed to still fulfill the, he'll change plot developments and sometimes suggest that a lot of stuff should be switched around. The most valuable thing from my standpoint is he will cut what I've written because I have a tendency to write long.
But you know you're doing it, so therefore it's not very painful.
It always hurts. It always hurts.
Your wife is a novelist.
That's right.
Do you show her chapter by chapter, or do you wait until you end it?
Generally speaking, I will show her a book in progress in about 3 chunks. So she will read the first third, and then the first 2/3, and then the whole thing.
She's the first person to see it.
She's always the first person to see it. And when she writes her novels, she has a tendency not to show me what she's involved with or even talk about it very much. And I certainly couldn't go into her office and pick it up because she works in a way that makes me want to scream. There's pages here, and there's pages there, and there's pages somewhere else, and I just don't understand how anybody can work in that clutter, but she probably doesn't understand how I work either. So we do show each other our stuff. Yeah.
And she makes changes and suggests changes and talks about character development and those kind of things?
Yep. She's very tough.
Yeah. I saw, this was just amazing, a Harper magazine. I remember, I think Harper, maybe Atlantic, one of the two, and they won't be thrilled that I don't remember which one it was, a list of all the ways that you have killed people. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But I've had a long career, and I've killed a lot of people, so.
Yeah. Well, what's been the most, for you, the one that was the most delicious? And I choose the word delicious on purpose.
Yeah, I think probably there's a story called Survivor Type. It's a short story. It's not in Nightmares and Dreamscapes. which, should you wonder, is on sale at a bookstore near you, even as we speak, from Viking Press. There's an earlier collection called Skeleton Crew. There's a story. This story, Survivor Type, was in that, and it didn't appear anywhere else because I couldn't sell it to a magazine. It was about a doctor who was smuggling heroin, who was on a boat that's shipwrecked, and he lands on this desert island, and there's nothing to eat. And so because he's a surgeon and he has all this anesthetic, he eats himself a piece at a time. And I remember going to this retired doctor who lived next to us and saying, how much of a person could a person like cut off before they died of shock or trauma? And I did. And this is the same guy a year before I'd gone to him and asked if it would be humanly possible for a human being to swallow a cat. So he'd gotten to a point where he didn't quite really trust me.
You are really weird, Mr. King.
No.
Much more weird than I thought.
Than you ever expected.
That's expected.
So he told me a person with a strong survival instinct could actually remove quite a bit of this person.
You know, recently we've had a couple of examples of that where people who have been trapped and have cut off limbs in order to get loose, otherwise they would have died.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, well, this guy sort of eats what he cuts off. Although he did make a fire and cook some of it, so I guess it was all right.
So, but that's the worst.
Well, you said the tastiest.
The tastiest, delicious, yeah, all right, delicious. What's the most heinous, the worst?
Boy, you're putting me on the spot. Like I say,
there's
been so many.
Deaths.
I think there was a guy in Firestarter. Well, I think, let me put it this way. In Nightmares and Dreamscapes, there are this couple that are eaten alive by carnivorous toads. So, will that work?
Yes, I'll take that. Have you ever gone too far and said, no, I've gone over the line?
Well, like I say, generally speaking, I will go ahead and write them anyway, because at this point I am sort of racing myself, and I'll tend to put them away. So that there are several times where I thought I had gone too far. I thought Pet Sematary was a step too far, and it was a tremendously popular book, which shows that it's almost impossible to gross out the American people. And at this point in my career, the British, the French, or the Germans either. But I continue to try.
Had a paraphrase of that, I think.
Yeah. I have a couple of ideas that are probably a little beyond the pale.
Yeah.
Right now.
What's your worst fear?
That one of my kids would die. That's the basis of Pet Sematary. I think the call in the middle of the night with a cop saying, brace yourself for some bad news.
Yeah, that would be the most horrible.
Yeah.
Having done all that you've done to...
Well, for me, I don't know about you, I'm a control freak. And for me...
Some say.
When your kids grow up, they go out on their own, and you can't protect them or insure them from the whips and scorns of outrageous fortune. You simply have to let them go. And I understand that because I'm a relatively rational human being in spite of the guy who eats himself, you know, and the carnivorous toads. I'm a rational human being, but there's a part of me that just does not want to let go, that wishes that I could ensure their success. You can't bargain with God.
You once said that the readers are interested in your secrets, not in what you've read. Meaning what?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how if I give an interview about my career, what I do for a living, sooner or later somebody will kind of say, by the way, what was your childhood like? People want to know where the bodies are buried. They want to know what twisted me to do what I'm doing, and the truth is even more horrible. The answer is nothing. I'm just this way naturally.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
It's great to have you.
It's great to be here.
Stephen King, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. It's a collection, some going back, and people say that it's delicious to read some of those that have a little bit of age on them.
Yeah, vintage.
Great to have you.
Thank you,
Thank
Charlie.
you very much. The Pride of Bangor, Maine, Stephen King. We'll be right back. Stay with us.